that means that for some reason, suddenly that moral worth comes in, but it wasn't there before when you had these two cells who had half the DNA, but suddenly there's a
Correct,
switch.
yes, something magical happens at that.
It's not magical, Charlie, we know about this.
Well, hold on.
Charlie.
Time out.
Simply about the fact that if you feel like that's what you need to do with your body, then that's what you do. Because I could also...
Well, hold on a second. If it's not your DNA, how is it your body?
It is your DNA.
No,
it's
not.
It's a part of you. It's
No.
growing in you. It's
Hold on a
connected to
second.
you by an umbilical cord. It is a part of you.
1 second. It's attached.
A part.
It's attached, not a part. Part, by definition, means it remains permanent,
Oh, okay.
right?
Oh, okay.
So an attachment is something that is temporary. And so you are not your mom's DNA. You're not your dad's DNA. You are new deoxyribonucleic acid.
All right, so thank you for coming, Charlie. My question to you, I'm a medical student, and so I'm going to throw out the big A word. I know you get asked about it a lot, but I want to hear it from you. What your opinion is on abortion.
Life begins at conception.
But about abortion specifically. Why do you think abortion's wrong specifically?
Well, you agree murder is wrong?
I agree. Okay, so this is where we get to the question, right? Because what is it about murder you say is wrong? Like, why is murder wrong?
Well, because it's a human being, not just because it has consciousness or because it's of a certain age, because it's a human.
Because and what is it that gives human being this moral worth?
Not its consciousness necessarily.
I didn't say it's consciousness.
I know, I can imagine it's because it is a human being, because that has a soul.
And what is this soul? Where does this come from? This idea that it's...
Exactly. Again, the Greeks postulated that it is the entirety of your being. Okay, you guys can laugh. It's true. Every civilization has had a different belief, but agreed upon ethical monotheism, which is the creed of the West and what the birth certificate of my country articulates, is that every human being is more than just matter, it's more than just a clump of cells, but it also has an invisible element to you that will live beyond you.
Fine, so, can you say that comes from the Bible, or where else do you get that from?
Ethical monotheism, which is the creed of the West. And again, the Declaration of Independence mentions God 4 times. The founders were explicitly believed not in a secular morality, but a divinely given one, of at least this idea that there is a God and you are not him. And let me ask you, what is the first stage of human development?
So this is the thing, right? We can take it from the sperm being generated in the father and the oocyte being generated in the mother, right? They fuse at birth, conception, sorry. The only thing that happens at conception is these two cells fuse, right?
No, DNA is created. A zygote.
DNA is not created.
A DNA, no, that's not true. The DNA,
Charlie,
DNA coding at the zygote. Hold on, time out.
I'll let you finish.
Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Charlie, DNA...
Does a zygote have a unique marker?
You have to let me speak. You have to...
But answer it, yes or no. Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Define a unique marker.
Meaning, can you differentiate the DNA coding between the mother and the zygote if you examine it under a deoxyribonucleic acid analysis? Can you?
Only purely because the addition comes from the father.
Oh, so it is something different.
Charlie, DNA is not created. DNA is not created. You have, the father has his own genome, the mother has her own genome. They fuse. This is why you have the same characteristics, similar ones to your mother, similar ones to your father. That's why you have similar characteristics to your siblings. DNA is not created, right? So when you ask me, where does a human being come from? I can say to you, it starts at conception, but all conception is these two cells joining, right? But these two cells were created, the mother cells were created long before, they were created when she was a fetus. So there's none of this DNA being produced, right? So we can't establish, the only thing that happens at conception is these two cells fuse. Now this idea that means that for some reason, suddenly that moral worth comes in, but it wasn't there before when you had these two cells who had half the DNA, but suddenly there's a
Correct,
flip of a
yes,
switch.
something magical happens at that.
It's not magical, Charlie, we know about this.
When people like Charlie Kirk say life begins at conception, they ignore basic biology. Conception isn't the creation of life, it's the merging of two already living cells. Sperm and egg each carry DNA long before they meet. At fertilization, those DNA strands just recombine. That's not new life in a moral sense. It's cell division, the same natural process that happens in countless organisms that never become human beings. And when he brings up the idea of a soul, that's not science, it's theology. The Bible itself doesn't even support his claim. In Genesis 2:7, life begins when Adam breathes. Breath, not conception, is the biblical marker of life. Historically, even major Christian thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas believed ensoulment came weeks after conception, not at the moment sperm meets egg. The Catholic Church only shifted to conception in the 19th century, showing this belief is cultural, not eternal truth. So when Charlie falls back on magic to explain why a zygote should suddenly be treated as morally equal to a fully conscious person, that's not evidence. It's avoidance. The science and even the history of his own religion undermine his claim.
Well, hold on.
Charlie.
Time out. Hold on.
Charlie, I promise you, I'm not trying to score points. I'm not trying to score points on you. This is genuinely...
We call it the miracle of life for a reason. We've not been able to yet replicate human life development outside of the womb.
We call it the miracle of life because, yes, it's something beautiful, the ability to form a new...
Magical.
It's not... You say magical as in, oh, it's beautiful, it's an incredible thing that happens, of course. But it's not incredible in the sense we don't know what's going on. There's no new DNA coming out of nowhere.
Hold on, but time out. Isn't there a separate DNA, though, than the mother?
Yes, from the father.
Okay, yes, but it's not the father's DNA either. A new coding is created.
Charlie,
you are a blend of the two. And so when did your life begin?
Okay, so
when did your life begin?
I mean, again, this comes from what you define as where life starts. You can say life starts at conception, but I'm telling you, I believe that's just an arbitrary point, right? That's just the moment these two cells fuse. Now, you say about this mother thing. So the way DNA is arranged in a cell is it's arranged in chromosomes. Chromosomes are paired up, so you have one from the mother, one from the father, typically, in a healthy individual, right? Now, you can take those maternal chromosomes out and you can find that this is who the person's mother is, and you can do the same with the father. Now, the reason you are different to your mother and father is because some of those chromosomes express genes that are different from each other, and so those genes interact, and that's what gives rise to you, right? But there's no space for any kind of moral framework to come into that until you consider that a human being is capable of consciousness and of suffering. But if you take that out of the equation, the fact that these two DNA, whatever they call molecules, right? These two DNA molecules are fusing, that does not suddenly flip a switch that attributes moral worth to that individual. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to score points. I'm trying to understand.
By what moral standard do you believe that?
I believe that if an individual is capable of suffering, then it's wrong. Now, can I explain my opinion on abortion, just so you can understand? I would agree, as many reasonable people would, that at 9 months, it's unreasonable to expect someone to get an abortion, right? Unless you have some extreme circumstances. But for an elective abortion seems a bit radical to me. But it also seems radical to say that a woman who has just, the cells have just fused, to deny her of an abortion also seems wrong to me. Because that zygote is not capable of suffering, as far as we know.
So by what moral standard? Is that just your opinion? Where did you get that moral standard from?
Because suffering is a bad thing. We all know suffering is a bad thing. That's an objective fact, right?
Well, hold on. So you do believe in objective morality?
I believe that suffering is an objectively negative
So if you can't feel it, is it okay?
What do you mean if you can't?
You can't feel the pain, is it okay to inflict the pain?
In the sense that if no one's suffering from it, if you have a scenario where nobody is suffering from something, then yes, of course. Something is only a moral question if it affects someone's well-being.
So let me just make sure I understand this correctly. That if it doesn't affect their well-being, so dementia patients that don't know who they are or where they're from, can we execute dementia patients because they're confused about their well-being?
Can you imagine a scenario?
Or Alzheimer's patients.
Charlie,
Alzheimer's patients don't really know much about anything. Can we schedule them for execution because they can't technically suffer?
I'll respond. So can you imagine a scenario where we lived in a society where we killed people when they suffered from dementia, were incapable of suffering, and we killed them, right? It's not a scenario that involves an absence of suffering. There's still suffering involved. Imagine you grow up thinking, my dad could be killed at any moment because he's going to get dementia. Imagine living your life thinking, I could get dementia and suddenly I'd be killed by my state.
Imagine a world where you slaughter 1 million babies every year in America.
Charlie, it's not slaughter, that's the problem.
Hold on, if it's a forcible removal from the umbilical cord of another human life, again, we have clarity but not agreement. Biologically, you know that your entire coding began at conception. Your coding,
that's
your uniqueness.
That's what I'm denying. I disagree with that.
Okay, when those two cells fused together, to use your terminology,
yes,
that is where the process of
scientifically accepted terminology.
In the interest of time, can we bring this question to a close?
The process of human development objectively begins at that moment. Therefore, those human beings are deserving of human.
What makes Charlie's position fall apart is that he keeps treating DNA as if it's some magic stamp of personhood. But DNA doesn't create moral value. Every living cell, from skin cells to bacteria, has DNA. Having a genetic code doesn't make something a conscious being with rights. What matters is the capacity to experience, to suffer, to have awareness. That's why modern ethics, medicine, and even secular law draw the line not at conception, but at viability, brain activity, or the capacity for sentience. The student is right. Suffering is the real moral standard. That's not opinion. It's grounded in philosophy and supported by science. The philosopher Jeremy Bentham put it simply back in the 18th century. The question is not, can they reason? Nor, can they talk? But, can they suffer? That idea shaped human rights, animal welfare, and modern bioethics. Charlie tries to derail this with dementia patients, but that misses the point. Dementia patients can still feel pain, fear, and joy. They can still suffer. They're also embedded in families and communities, so killing them would cause enormous suffering for others. That's exactly why the student's argument holds up. Morality is about reducing harm and suffering, not about clinging to a mystical idea of souls or coding. And calling abortion slaughter is emotional manipulation. The reality is that most abortions occur in the first trimester, when the embryo has no brain activity and no capacity for pain. That's not slaughter, that's medicine. The numbers show it clearly. In the United States, about 93% of abortions happen before 13 weeks, long before the nervous system is developed enough for suffering.
Rights. We keep going, or do you want to?
No, thank you. That's.
Can I finish?
Yeah, you can finish.
The process of development begins from the moment the sperm is being generated in the father, the moment the eggs are being generated in the mother. To say that suddenly the moral worth switches on when they fuse doesn't make any sense. That's just a point you've taken.
It makes perfect sense, because that is when your journey as a human being, when the sperm and egg were separate, you were not yet a fused human being. You were not created uniquely.
DNA existed.
Any image.
Your DNA existed. I thought.
Well, no, the parts of your DNA.
So the reason why I believe the right to an abortion, why just anyone, if you feel that's what you need to do, then you should do it. Because Matthew 7:1 says, do not judge or you too will be judged. Although Jesus does tell us to tell people, do not sin, it's not our place to judge them, you know? And then another thing that I wanted to bring up, this is crazy, but also the time, I just really want to know why you feel that abortion should be illegal.
Do you think murder should be illegal?
Murder is illegal.
So you think it should be? Do you think it should be illegal?
I just feel like there's a big difference between like a living, breathing human and then a fetus that is inside of another human's body.
Fair enough. What is the difference?
The difference is a fetus is inside of the body. You know what I'm saying? Like a fetus, it can't live on its own.
Got it. So let's go through a couple questions there.
Okay.
Why does somebody's location determine their moral worth?
It doesn't, but it's simply about the fact that if you feel like that's what you need to do with your body, then that's what you do. Because I could also
Well, hold on a second. If it's not your DNA, how is it your body?
It is your DNA.
No, it's not.
It's a part of you. It's
no.
growing in you. It's
Hold on a
connected to
second.
you by an umbilical cord. It is a part of you.
1 second. It's attached.
A part.
It's attached. Hold on a second. It's attached, not a part.
Same thing.
No, it's actually not. A part, by definition, means it remains permanent.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Oh, okay.
So an attachment is something that is temporary. And so it's not, you are not your mom's DNA. You're not your dad's DNA. You are new deoxyribonucleic acid. So shouldn't we say that if it's not your DNA, it's not your choice?
I mean, you could say that, but I mean, really, I just don't understand how you can use religion to back up your point of...
I haven't used it once. She brought up religion. I'm happy to use a non-religious line of questioning. We all agree murder is wrong.
Okay.
We all agree that it's a human Homo sapien.
Do you agree that the death penalty is wrong?
Well, no, I'm actually in support of the death penalty because
Okay.
people do something that justifies that, but that's a separate issue because the baby in utero did not go...
So what about the people who could possibly be proved innocent who have been awaiting their death sentence?
Fair enough. That's a good argument, but it's separate, right? So there's been about 31 exonerations of posthumous people that have been exonerated of the death penalty. We're talking about a baby that did nothing wrong except exist.
Okay.
in utero, and there's about 1.5 million of them that just get discarded every year. So we agree murder is wrong. We agree it's a homo sapien, meaning it's a human being. Therefore, murder is the forcible termination of a homo sapien. Therefore, shouldn't abortion be wrong and illegal?
I still feel like it really, like, okay, for example.
But to prove to me
something
why,
you said-
you use an ABC logical equation, right? So tell me under what standard, therefore, very simple, right? You're in college, you guys do this all the time, right? I hope so. So use an ABC, right? Aristotelian logic, whatever you want to use. Use an ABC sequence for me. Not
My
I feel.
reasoning why I believe that abortion should be legal is because of instances like rape and incest, but I already know that your belief on that because you've already stated that if your daughter were to be raped at 10 years old, you would make her give birth to
the baby would be delivered, and let me tell you why. And so, but first of all,
Okay.
let me try to find common ground.
Okay.
If I say we will make rape and incest abortions legal and get rid of all the other abortions, would you agree with that?
Can you repeat that? I'm so sorry.
If I say that we will allow abortions to continue for rape and incest life of the mother, but all other abortions should be illegal, which is 99.4% of the time, can we make those 99% of abortions illegal?
Yeah, see, I don't believe that abortion should be used as a form of birth control.
So 99% of the time it is. That's all that we're debating in the country right now. So Charlie Kirk's position is a very fringe minority. People are talking about still exceptions, so we should get rid of 99% of abortions.
Yes, but at the same time,
So you're actually not that pro-choice, actually.
but I am because I feel like there's no way to kind of divide the basis of like what abortion is being used as birth control and what abortion
Oh,
is
it's
being
totally
used.
easy, actually. I mean, so you could tell through a DNA test if it's an incest baby.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell if it's rape because they have to file a police report. And you could tell life of the mother based on an OBGYN analysis. So that's,
Okay, so
it's
then
a
if
very,
it's that easy, then why have we not done that?
Oh, because the American people don't support it. Because abortion is popularly supported as a form of birth control. That's why. So your position is actually a very rational one, and I respect you for it. 99% of all abortions are done just because people want the baby gone. 99%. That's not Charlie Kirk's numbers. That's the Guttmacher Institute, which was funded by Planned Parenthood.
Okay. So do you like feel as though like people who are victims of rape and incest, do you think that they should be able to get an abortion?
Charlie keeps trying to frame this as simple math. Human DNA equals human rights. Abortion equals murder. But reality is much more complicated. Having human DNA doesn't make something a person. Every discarded skin cell has human DNA, but we don't treat skin cells like they're entitled to rights. Personhood isn't about DNA. It's about consciousness, viability, and the ability to experience the world. That's why medicine, law, and ethics all distinguish between a fetus that cannot survive outside the womb and a living, breathing human being. Even religion doesn't give him the certainty he claims. The Bible never says life begins at conception. In fact, Exodus 21 describes a miscarriage differently from the killing of an adult, showing the ancients did not see them as equal. And Matthew 7:1, the verse the student quoted, cuts directly against Charlie's entire approach. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. If Christianity itself tells people not to sit in judgment over others' choices, how can it be used to justify controlling women's bodies? On top of that, Charlie pushes a false statistic when he says 99% of abortions are just birth control. The Guttmacher Institute's research shows the reality is more complex. The majority of people who get abortions cite multiple reasons: financial insecurity, inability to care for another child, abusive relationships, health concerns, or disruption to education or work. To reduce all of that to birth control is dishonest. And let's not forget, abortion is overwhelmingly supported by the public. Poll after poll shows that a majority of Americans believe abortion should remain legal in most cases. Charlie's position is the fringe one, not the student's. What this whole exchange shows is that when confronted with science, history, and even religious texts, Charlie dodges, simplifies, or shifts the goalposts. The students, on the other hand, ground their reasoning in facts, ethics, and lived reality. So here's the question: should our laws be built on dogma or on evidence and compassion for real people's lives? If you found this breakdown helpful, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive.
This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments simply by immediately experiencing him.
Nature of the soul, the significance of the resurrection, and so on. Bertrand Russell put it well when he considered the prospect of there being a teapot in orbit around Mars. If enough people start convincing themselves that there is a teapot in orbit around Mars, then it soon becomes an object of scholarly debate and extraordinarily difficult to disprove by logic, or more reliably by experiment.
Carried out a ministry of miracles and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands, and thus evidence for the existence of God. Now, Dr. Atkins says, I know of no evidence that the resurrection did take place. But there are actually 3 established facts recognized by the majority of New Testament historians today, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact number 1. On the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was discovered empty by a group of his women followers. According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian scholar who has specialized in the study of the resurrection, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. Fact number 2. On separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic of Vanderbilt University, Gert Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number 3. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar at Emory University, says, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, that is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. There is no plausible naturalistic explanation of these 3 facts. Therefore, it seems to me the Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that entails that God exists. Finally, number 5, the immediate experience of God. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments simply by immediately experiencing him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, to them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experiential reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is so, then there's a danger that proofs for God could actually distract your attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make his existence evident to you. The Bible promises, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. In conclusion, then, we've yet to see any evidence to show that God does not exist, and we have seen 5 reasons to think that God does exist. Together, these reasons constitute a powerful cumulative case for the existence of God. If Dr. Atkins wants us to believe atheism instead, then he must first tear down all 5 of the reasons that I presented, and then in their place erect a case of his own to prove that God does not exist. Unless and until he does that, I think we can conclude that theism is the more plausible worldview.
When we look at the resurrection claim critically, the evidence falls apart. The Gospels are our only sources for the empty tomb, yet they were written 40 to 70 years after the crucifixion in Greek by people who never met Jesus. Paul, the earliest Christian writer, never even mentions an empty tomb in his letters. In fact, 1 Corinthians 15, his main resurrection passage, only speaks of appearances, which fits experiences of visions, not physical encounters. Psychology explains this well. Grief-induced hallucinations are common. Studies show that up to 30% of widows report sensing or seeing their deceased spouse. Entire groups can share these experiences, like the Marian apparitions at Fatima, witnessed by thousands in 1917, or mass UFO sightings. These don't prove the supernatural. They prove how human perception works. Historically, resurrection myths weren't unique. Osiris in Egypt, Mithras in Persia, and Dionysus in Greece were all said to have died and risen. Christianity emerged in the same cultural environment, and Jewish apocalyptic expectation primed the disciples to reinterpret visions of Jesus as proof of his messiahship. Even the Bible shows contradictions. In Mark, the earliest gospel, the women flee the tomb in fear and tell no one. Mark 16:8. Matthew adds an earthquake and guards. John rewrites the story again with different characters. These are not consistent eyewitness reports, but evolving theology.
Stress that whereas the assertion of God as an explanation of anything has an air of sublime simplicity, that simplicity is an illusion. An omniscient and omnipotent being that can create a universe, some say maintain that universe, that can intrude into the universe to achieve miracles and resurrections, is no simple entity. A God is the apotheosis of complexity, not the apotheosis of simplicity. And the invocation of a God as an explanation of anything, even the warm sentimental feelings that are said to suffuse us in the presence of the Almighty, is in fact the apotheosis of laziness. It's well suited to armchair brains who prefer to indulge in adipose arguments. You're not here, I trust, because you're one of those. Now, the invocation of God as an explanation of anything is an admission of defeat and of ignorance disguised as a pretense of understanding. I've set myself a challenge to show that everything in and of the world of the body and of the spirit can be understood without needing to invoke a God. There's no point in being an atheist, and certainly a scientist, without being rigorously intellectually honest. So I have to set myself an honest target, which is nothing less than complete explanation, nothing fudged, nothing forgotten. The atheist argument fails if in the end it turns out that the universe had to be designed. It fails if any aspect of it had to be made. It fails if it turns out that there had to be a seed the size of a pea or even the size of a proton. We atheists must not cloud the issue. That's for the religious who do it so admirably and on such a cosmic scale. The atheist argument fails if it turns out that there is a purpose for the world. The atheist argument fails if it turns out that there is an afterlife, that miracles occur, or that a God is necessary to maintain the workings of physical law. The atheist argument begins to corrode if there are aspects of the human condition that science cannot touch, such as the supreme joy of artistic creation. That, then, is the challenge. Nothing less than complete explanation. Therefore, inevitably, I have to disappoint you. Science cannot yet explain everything. It cannot yet tell us what went on at the event we call the creation. It cannot yet provide a theory or even a simulation of consciousness. It would be quite wrong of me to pretend that it could. However, what I can hope to do is to present you with a scientific view of the world, a view that makes a convincing case that science can elucidate the great questions that have for centuries been regarded as religion's own. And with your newly cleansed deprejudiced minds, you should be able to accept that science provides a richer, more comprehensible, more reliable, more deeply satisfying account of the cosmos than the primitive pseudo-explanations peddled by well-meaning but scientifically under-informed apologists. I'll deal with the most difficult problem first, creation ex nihilo. The adipose argument is that God did it. That, of course, is the lazy man's elixir, sort of a cocktail made up of a swig of credulity and a teaspoonful of unwillingness to think. In short, it's an explanation that avoids explanation. Science has moved cautiously but steadily towards the provision of a true understanding. I will not bore you with accounts of the events after the Big Bang, which is now universally believed by scientists to be a broadly correct description of the events immediately following the creation. I want to explore whether it is conceivable that science can elucidate the events at the creation, for that is where the atheist stands on the most dangerous ground. Notice that I intend to confront issues, not evade them. Science proceeds by exposing the true simplicity that underlies perceived complexity. Scientists are hewers of simplicity from complexity. I believe that it is possible for science to formulate an account, and it will be a mathematical account, full of precision, full of logical authority, full of the testability that is such a kingly quality of science, of what went on at the Big Bang, when space-time itself and the laws of nature came into existence. Science can already show that a creator had less to do than perhaps...
The idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful being is not simple. It raises far more questions than it answers. Saying God did it explains nothing. It only shifts the mystery. For example, if the universe requires a designer, then who designed God? By definition, God would be even more complex than the universe we're trying to explain. Science, by contrast, looks for underlying simplicity. The Big Bang theory already shows that the universe can be described by natural laws, without divine intervention. Quantum cosmology suggests the universe could emerge from a quantum vacuum. Nothing, in physics, isn't empty, but a field of energy governed by testable rules. Hawking and Hartle's no-boundary proposal even models a universe without a need for a creator at all. History also shows us that invoking God has been a placeholder for ignorance. Lightning was once Zeus's anger, disease was demonic possession, and the Earth's motion was said to require angels pushing the planets. Every time science advanced, the God explanation shrank. Even in Scripture, contradictions appear when people try to make God an explanation. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 give two different creation orders, evidence of human storytelling, not divine clarity.
It's the eye. Let me present one tiny technical argument this evening. How much electric charge is there in the universe? The answer is none. We know experimentally that there is an equal amount of positive and negative charge, which if summed together gives zero charge overall. At the creation, no charge separated into opposite charges. Nothing separated into opposites. Secondly, and more potently, how much material is there in the universe? Another way to answer this question is to ask how much energy there is in the universe. For Einstein showed that mass and energy are equivalent. When the sum is done, and that involves adding together all the masses of all the protons, all the people, all the priests, all the planets, all the stars and all the galaxies, as well as the gravitational attraction between them, the answer is close to zero. I suspect that as observations are refined, the total will approach zero. There is no energy in the universe. Nothing did indeed come from nothing. Science shows that the universe is, in fact, a big confidence trick. There is truly nothing here. All there is a separation of opposites. Now, what that argument shows is that the event that took place at the creation is very much simpler than one might think. God, if he had to do anything, did not have to make anything. All he had to do, if he had anything to do at all, was to separate nothing into equal and opposite components. Now, that doesn't solve the problem of what went on at the creation, but it makes creation ex nihilo a far simpler process than you might have thought, for literally nothing had to be made. That argument at least diminishes God's role. Now, I could also sketch in an argument that suggests how the reorganization of nothing could take place acausally. There is, of course, no causality before the arena of space-time has been established, so it would be absurd to project backwards our familiarity with causality in our current arena and use it as an argument for God in an arena when space-time did not exist. No one knows how space-time came into being acausally, but there are hints. I would like to say what I think happened, but happily Dr. Craig has done that for me. But quite honestly, I don't think it matters what I think what went on at the creation, because it would be just pure speculation. Speculation without the rigor of mathematics and observation is as syrupy a bog as religion. All I want to leave you with is the realization that the universe is an engagingly reorganized form of nothing, and that speculative acausal events are capable of seeing it come into being without intervention. No God was needed to make the universe, or even to make it happen. My argument diminishes the role of a creator God to zero. Another potent argument produced by adipose brains in favor of a mental labor-saving God is the apparent fine-tuning of the structure of the universe as it tumbled into existence. People intent upon proving the hand of a designer bandy about amazing figures, 10 to the this, 10 to the that. We've had tens followed by an imaginable number of zeros already this evening. All such calculations are sort of hocus pocus and bunkum. There is no a priori way of calculating the probability of the existence of the universe. However, I do have to admit that it gives the impression of being well designed. Had I a lazy brain, I would lie back and leave it at that, and accept that design implied designer, and hence a god in one of his disguises. But not having a lazy brain, I look for a simpler explanation. Several spring to mind. One possibility is that by chance the universe tumbled into being with this particular mix of fundamental constants. There's no way of calculating the probability of that, but it would, I concede, be exceedingly remote. Nevertheless, if something can happen, it could happen. Someone wins the lottery. The second possibility is that a universe can come into existence only with a particular mix of fundamental constants. Other universes, some with pi equals 42, others with bright pink electrons weighing a ton, might bubble into incipient existence but collapse again through want of stability or in some way being logically self-inconsistent. A third possibility is that there are trillions and trillions of universes, with trillions more popping up into existence as I speak. Now, I must emphasize that I most definitely do not have in mind the profligate many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which I find personally distasteful. I mean real, actual universes defining their own space-time and with a unique mix of fundamental constants. Some have pi equals 3.15, others have pi equals 3.16, ours happen to have pi equals 3.14, and bingo, it permits the emergence of life. Now, there would be some who say that a trillion universes is more demanding than a single universe with its one creator. That's logical nonsense. An unstructured, unmade, totally chaotic emergence of random universes without a God is a far, far less complex happening than a single, awesomely well-defined universe with an omnipotent creator. One is random, the other structured. Unless you can show explicitly that this random chance event cannot account for all there is, you have no right to resort to the extraordinarily complex proposition that there is a God who did it. Let me turn briefly to the purpose of the universe, which some aver exists and which, they assert, gives credence to an almighty God. It's so important to distinguish real questions that, when answered, illuminate the deep structure of the world from invented questions that elucidate only the psychology of the individual or the society that poses them. Many religious questions are of the second kind. They are windows onto the psyche of the soul, not windows onto the heart of matter. Purpose is an excellent example of the latter, ranking alongside the prospect of an afterlife, the nature of the soul, the significance of the resurrection, and so on. Bertrand Russell put it well when he considered the prospect of there being a teapot in orbit around Mars. If enough people start convincing themselves that there is a teapot in orbit around Mars, then it soon becomes an object of scholarly debate, and extraordinarily difficult to disprove by logic, or more reliably by experiment.
Atkins' argument that the universe could come from nothing isn't speculation. It's rooted in physics. Experiments confirm the total electric charge of the universe equals 0. Positive and negative cancel out perfectly. On top of that, Einstein's equation E equals mc squared shows matter and energy are interchangeable. And when we add up all the mass of stars, galaxies, and people against the negative energy of gravity, the balance is close to 0. In other words, the universe may be a net nothing. No miracle required. This fits what cosmologists like Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking have argued. Quantum mechanics allows particles to pop in and out of existence without cause. At the beginning, before space and time, causality itself doesn't apply. Invoking God doesn't solve the mystery. It only adds an even bigger unexplained entity. As for fine-tuning, the multiverse offers a simple answer. If countless universes exist, each with different constants, then it's no surprise that one, ours, happens to allow life. It's like winning the lottery, unlikely, but inevitable for someone. And history shows how purpose has often been invented by religions to explain the unknown, from attributing plagues to divine wrath to claiming the earth was the center of the cosmos. Each time, science replaced superstition with knowledge. Even the Bible reflects human invention. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 give conflicting creation stories, while Ecclesiastes 9:5 bluntly says, "The dead know nothing," undermining the idea of an afterlife. These contradictions highlight myth-making, not divine truth. Atkins is right. Religion explains psychology, not reality. Science gives us testable answers, while faith rests on assumptions. So here's the question. If science can explain the universe without God, why keep clinging to a supernatural answer? Comment your thoughts below. Hit like if you found this breakdown helpful, and subscribe for more deep dives into debates that shape how we see the world.
How suspicious are you of something like Christianity insofar as it does seem to answer something like existential dread? In the way that you say, look, if you don't believe in God, then it ends at death, and when you suffer, your suffering is meaningless. Whereas if you become a Christian, it fills you with meaning, it fills you with purpose, it sort of brings you sort of self-assurance that life is still worth living. And I think to myself, okay, like, is the problem of evil a response to Christianity, or is Christianity a response to the problem of
Seculare is ultimately going to fail you if suffering comes along. But for a Christian, suffering comes along, meaning only grows from that eternal perspective.
Cliff and Stuart Connectly? Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Alex.
How did I do? Did I get it right?
Awesome. Nailed it.
Yeah.
First
Okay.
time.
Okay. Good. We're going to dive right into the deep end here. What is, if you had to summarize, the ultimate 2-sentence blurb summary of what Christianity is all about? What's its main message?
That God created us to love him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbors ourselves. At times we've done it, at times we haven't. When we don't, that's called sin, and it leads to a consequence, separation from God, death, and hell. But God loves us so much that he sent his only son, Jesus, to bleed and die on a cross to forgive us, to offer us a free gift, grace, forgiveness, and eternal life. And now, as we put our faith in him, he gives us that gift, and we begin a life with him now and for eternity.
And that gift has a lot to do with forgiveness for the sorry state that we find ourselves in. Now, what I really want to begin by digging into is, firstly, why we're in such a sorry state, whether it's our fault, and then also what it means for this Jesus figure to be coming along and forgiving us of our sins. So the way that you just described the fact that we were created for some purpose, which is to love God, but we so routinely don't do that. What's your analysis of like why that's the case? Why people are in need of this Jesus figure to come along and save us?
Well, we see it across the country right now with what I would call a revival. We might define revival differently, probably would, all three of us. But there's a God-shaped hole that every single college student I've seen truly has. And there's all of a sudden randomly this pervasive desire to fill that hole. And whether it was the wake-up call from COVID with a lot of suffering that came from there, whether it's where our culture is at right now, and just the suffocation that's going on with busyness, with technology, you name it, they are getting rattled to the point of saying, wow, I need something that really calls me into a higher standard, but I'm also in a high level of pain. That's why you see divorce rates, 54%, anxiety rates on college campuses, 60%, 90% of people say that they have immense amounts of anxiety, depression skyrocketing, obviously suicide. I've had to deal with a few suicide cases recently. And then also on college campuses, I have people come up to me all the time, sobbing, saying, I was considering taking my life, or I have a family member or a friend who just did. And so there's some pain there, and they're trying to figure out what to fill it with.
There's definitely something going on. People often talk about the meaning crisis, existentialism, and I wonder how confidently you can attribute that to something like secularism or atheism, as opposed to, say, the sort of unimaginable shift in our communication with things like social media. Right? Like if I sort of analyze my daily life and think, well, if I'm feeling anxious or depressed, why is that? Is it because I haven't been to church today because I don't believe in God? Or is it because I've just scrolled through a news feed that tells me that, some country's just been bombed and has told me that my favorite celebrity has, said something they shouldn't and now they're getting cancelled and I have to decide whether to cancel my subscription to their service, and I sort of have 100 messages to respond to and emails and this kind of thing. I feel like the meaning crisis and the anxiety and the sort of the strange emptiness and shallowness of modern life is often just trivially attributed to the decline of religion. Whereas I wonder if we can really be as confident about that.
Well, according to the latest Harvard studies, we can be.
Now we're talking.
And now we're talking is right. And so one was titled, if spirituality could be put into a pill, it would save endless amounts of lives. So Harvard has done 3 different studies over the last few decades on religion and mental, physical health, and so longevity. And so the latest one was those who go to church, doesn't work with social clubs or anything of the like, church weekly, the women have a 60% higher chance of not remaining hooked on drugs. Emotional well-being skyrockets, longevity skyrockets, and those who bring their kids to church on a regular basis, those kids in their 20s have a much, much higher percentage of well-being, happiness, and flourishing. And the studies are longer than that. Like obviously altruism skyrockets for those who go to church and that sort of thing. So this is a very secular, slightly academic study that has shown this numerous times. So I think the meaning crisis, yes, it has a lot to do with church. I think you probably know Andrew Delbanco, who wrote The American Dream. He was a secularist, and he charted the history of the U.S. and showed how it wasn't too long ago when the nation really elevated God and church. And then it kind of shifted to patriotism and focusing on country and fighting for your country. So it's still something outside of yourself. But now secularism has poisoned our nation because it brings a high level of individualism and a focus on the self rather than something higher. And by doing so, that's why there's a meaning crisis, according to this sect.
Christians often claim that the so-called meaning crisis is proof people need God. But when we look at the evidence, that claim doesn't hold up. Rates of depression and anxiety have risen sharply in the past 20 years, yet in the same period, the U.S. has remained overwhelmingly Christian. Over 65% still identify that way according to Pew Research. Clearly, losing faith is not the main driver. Instead, science points to social and technological factors. A 2019 JAMA psychiatry study showed teenagers spending more than 3 hours daily on social media doubled their risk of depression. Economic stress, inequality, and constant digital overstimulation explain far more than a decline in church attendance. Even the Bible admits believers suffer just as much as non-believers. Ecclesiastes 9:2 says, "All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked." And if attending church automatically brought peace, we wouldn't see so many pastors caught in burnout, scandal, and even suicide. History also shows religion isn't a safeguard against despair. Medieval Europe was intensely religious, yet plagued by war, disease, and mass hysteria like the witch trials. By contrast, today's most secular nations like Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands consistently rank among the happiest and healthiest societies on earth, according to the UN's World Happiness Report.
Secularist.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about secularism in the United States in particular. It's interesting hearing it framed in those terms. I mean, because one of my other thoughts on this is that something that Americans might have lost is that national identity. I've previously talked about how I watched sort of political debates from not even that long ago, maybe the 70s or 80s, and people are quoting the founding fathers like they're quoting hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, as if it like settles debates, you know. And there seemed to be this mythos around the founding of America and all of these stories and the almost religious art, you know, that you see at the Declaration of Independence or Washington crossing the Delaware. And I thought to myself, well, maybe Americans are missing that as well. Maybe it's not so much the God stuff that's been tying them together this long, but that they have this kind of national story to identify with. But you would say that that's not the case.
I heard a commentator recently, again, non-Christian, say that Christian nationalism is basically being spawned out of those who are not going to church regularly. So if you increase religion, you will do away with Christian nationalism.
Interesting.
But a far, far, far right fringe would be considered Christian nationalists, and they have assumed a political identity that they've deified. And so that has formed what we would call Christian nationalism. And that's why the term evangelical has been poisoned as well. Poor Billy Graham and others would be rolling over in their graves right now because that's not what they meant it to be. So that's what happens when you put nation ahead of everything else. My point is God is the only thing that can ultimately sustain the weight of your greatest desires and your meaning.
You said secularism has poisoned our nation, your nation. Is it secularism or is it atheism? These are two different things. You can have a nation of atheists living in some kind of theocracy, right? But you could also have a nation of Christian believers living in a secular state. Do you think that would be as much of a problem? Is it the fact that they don't believe, or is it the fact that this is not sort of built into the institutions of government?
Well, I like Charles Taylor in A Secular Age when he talks about the buffered self.
Yes, yeah.
And when you look at the buffered self, you are going to have to grab on to something here and deify it. And Infinite Jest as well, David Foster Wallace talked about if you worship, everybody worships, he says, and obviously a strong atheist. Everybody worships. If you worship something finite, it will eat you alive. If you worship something infinite, it will sustain you no matter what and give you joy and happiness. So I think secularism for me, there's many ways to define it. You'd probably know more than me, but one is nowism. It's like, what's happening now? There's no future now. And for me, Charles Taylor would step in and say, the buffer itself, so there's nothing above you. And so you're going to have to find something, and it's typically yourself, to fall into to find ultimately your meaning and purpose. But if there's, again, with the buffer itself, if there is no eternal perspective, if there is nothing above just death and the finite, then any meaning, purpose, and happiness that you gain here, nowism, seculare, is ultimately going to fail you if suffering comes along. But for a Christian, suffering comes along and your meaning only grows from that eternal perspective.
Yeah, there are a few things to say. I mean, first is to ask, and maybe you don't know this, but this correlation between wellness and religious practice, is this about religion or is it about Christianity? I mean, do Muslims experience the same kind of thing? I mean, as far as I know, that's also the case, right? It's something not necessarily, we haven't got there yet, about Christianity or Christ, but something about the transcendent, something about religious communities coming together, something like that. Or is it something about Christianity that gives people this well-being?
Yeah, that study was not done on mosques and other faiths. So I don't know exactly, but I do believe, based out of Dartmouth is near us, and Dartmouth did a bunch of studies showing that those who are able to look upward first and have God, and then, so like, it's basically like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those who are able to get outside of themselves like that, rather than fall in on themselves, which is the massive majority of Americans right now, they have that type of mental health. So I believe, basically it's conjecture. My theory would be identity. I think those who go to church frequently have a more durable identity, because it's not the kind of the more the traditional type where it's your parents determine, or your culture determines your identity. And it's not the more modern type, which is I determine my own identity. So I get that through achievement, for example. I get that through looking at my own inward desires, or I get that through, it's just because it's postmodern, it's kind of just true for me. So I think identity, and then something beyond, something like the secular version of hope, which is just blind optimism. All right, maybe not blind, but some level of optimism. Christianity gives you an eternal form of hope that gets you through things. So those would be, I think there's many categories, but those would be two that the church gives.
The idea that secularism poisons nations ignores the evidence. The most secular countries today, like Finland, Sweden, and Norway, consistently top the UN World Happiness Report and have some of the lowest levels of crime, suicide, and poverty. By contrast, heavily religious nations such as Afghanistan or Somalia score among the lowest in happiness and stability. That shows well-being isn't tied to Christianity, but to social safety nets, education, and equality. And the claim that secular people inevitably deify politics ignores that religion itself often fuels nationalism. The Crusades, the 30 Years' War, and even modern Christian nationalism in the U.S. show that religion and state power can be a toxic mix. The Bible itself has been used to justify slavery, Ephesians 6:5, and absolute obedience to rulers, Romans 13:1, which historically made it easier to sanctify nationalism, not prevent it. Alex is also right to ask whether the supposed benefits are unique to Christianity. They're not. A 2015 Pew study showed Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists also report higher well-being when engaged in community worship. The pattern isn't about truth, but about community and ritual, which can be found outside religion entirely, in civic groups, cultural traditions, or even shared hobbies.
How suspicious are you of something like Christianity insofar as it does seem to answer something like existential dread? In the way that you say, look, if you don't believe in God, then it ends at death. And when you suffer, your suffering is meaningless. Whereas if you become a Christian, it fills you with meaning, it fills you with purpose, it sort of brings you sort of self-assurance that life is still worth living. And I think to myself, okay, like, is the problem of evil a response to Christianity, or is Christianity a response to the problem of evil? Are there a bunch of people suffering, unsure of their existence? They don't know why they're here. They don't know why they suffer. They don't know why good people suffer and bad people don't. And so here's a story we can tell ourselves which will help us overcome that. And there are two theses here. One is that that's because it's true and this is how the world is supposed to be. And one is that, well, it's because of all of the suffering and the meaninglessness that people have created this story of Christianity to overcome it. I mean, I'm always my suspicion of a position it almost exactly correlates with how convenient it is, either spiritually, politically. And in this case, it seems like Christianity is like the ultimate spiritual convenience, given the world we find ourselves in. I mean, does that trouble you at all?
One of the reasons I respect Siddhartha Gautama Buddha is because he struggled through the problem of suffering. And I respect that highly. But his conclusion I find to be totally inadequate. Suffering's an illusion. Are you kidding me? No, suffering is not an illusion. Suffering is something that every single one of us is going to experience. And that is why I'm so grateful for the biblical worldview that says God created and he did a good job in Genesis chapter 1, but then the world was cursed. The world got unhinged, and suffering and chaos and evil and injustice entered the experience of humankind as a result of human rebellion against God. And then it's fascinating to watch different parts of the Bible address the issue of suffering. And one of my favorites is the book of Job. And I think one of the main points of Job is life is unfair, God is fair. Don't get the two mixed up. Life is unfair, God is fair. Don't wave your fist in God's face when you suffer, because it's not God's fault. It's the unfairness of life that is smacking the living daylights out of you. And then when you get to Christ, you see that God is a suffering God who becomes a human being, and life kicked his teeth in, no question about it. And he suffered, and then he bled and died on a cross. And I think right at that point, you're confronted by one of the most amazing things of God's character, which is his humility. He humbles himself, becomes a human being, suffers in order to provide the ultimate solution for suffering, forgiveness, and eternal life. And then when you get to the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible, you've got in Revelation 21:4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order has been wiped away. Behold, all things have become new. And that is the hope that we have as followers of Christ, that Jesus will return one day. There'll be a day of judgment, a heaven and a hell. We will receive new resurrection bodies to live for eternity with God in heaven. Which means if my secular atheist friend and I are standing on either sides of the bed where the little babies or young child is lying, whose body's being shredded by some weird, grotesque disease, the question is there a solution? And if my atheist secular friend is going to be honest, there is no solution. Hunk of primordial slime evolved to a higher order is falling apart. Tough luck, kid. That's just fate, destiny, chance. But a follower of Christ will walk to the other side of the bed and will hold that child's hand and seek to comfort that child. But in Jesus Christ, we have a suffering God who provides the ultimate solution for suffering and death, eternal life in heaven.
But so I feel like in so many words, you're saying the same thing as me, but concluding something different. That is like, the atheist also wants to comfort that child. They also want to take, but they find themselves unable to do so because they know that it is all meaningless, that it is all just molecules in motion, that suffering has no redemption or justification. And so then you say, well, hold on, if you're a believer in Christ, that problem goes away. And I go, that sounds pretty good. It almost sounds too good to be true. You see what I'm saying? Like it's so convenient. It's so brilliant at overcoming the most fundamental, deepest existential problems of humanity that it sort of garners some suspicion. I mean, what is the message of the book of Job? Like, well, who the hell are you to ask questions? Don't even go there. Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Like
that doesn't come till later.
No, like he allows.
It's okay to ask, but then he gets shamed because he's asking too much, it seems.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in, well, perhaps we can do a sort of Job exegesis, but you see what I'm saying about the convenience thing, right? Because everything you've just said, where you've said, well, look, we live in a world and suffering is real. Yes, I agree. And like, as an atheist, you're going to look at that and you're going to go, this is all meaningless. Yes, I agree. And Christianity allows you to say it's not. Yes, I agree. But, like, so would a great many beliefs that I could probably invent. They wouldn't be as comprehensive or impressive as the Christian worldview, for sure. But the very fact that it serves that purpose makes me suspicious as to its, its psychological origin. You
bet. But when you love and when you are loved, it's almost too good to be true.
Yeah.
When you experience joy, real joy, that's not based on the circumstances of life, but that goes far deeper than that, it's almost too good to be true. You're right. And hope for a future that doesn't end in the grave, where there's more to us than just becoming fertilizer. Instead, we're human beings created to enjoy God for eternity, and God has put eternity in our hearts, and that's why we have this longing for eternal life. Yeah, maybe it is too good to be true. And that's why a careful study of the Gospels, I think, is so important to find out, did Jesus really rise from the dead or not?
Yeah.
Is this just a pipe dream, or is there some substance to this?
Well, perhaps we can do that. I mean, there are so many angles to take here. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say on Job before we do the resurrection stuff, because I read the book of Job. I'm fascinated by Job.
Mm-hmm.
And
I guess my only question, was your point that Job wasn't allowed to doubt? God didn't want to doubt? Or what was exactly your point?
He's allowed to doubt.
Yeah.
But of course, who knows what Job is really about. There's a kind of irony in Job. My old tutor, Dr. Catherine Southwood, actually thinks that Job should be read as a comedy. It's so many different interpretations. There's an irony underlying the book of Job, which is that Job never knows and never finds out why he's suffering. But we do. The reader does. We're in the knowledge. We know what's going on. We know that this is essentially God's counsel, including the accuser, this one of the earliest inclusions of this character of Satan, who is essentially challenging God and saying, like, he only worships you because you're good to him. And Satan says, okay, give me some authority over his life. Let me do some things to him. And God allows him. And so he's suffering. And we know this as the reader. And Job is left with his friends to spend most of the book just like, what went wrong? What have I done? Could it be this? Well, you must have done a sin. No, that's not right. This isn't right. Until finally God speaks back and doesn't reveal the answer, but says, like, who the hell are you to ask these questions? Who do you think you are? You know nothing about, like, how the world works or how it was put together or anything like that. And then Job immediately, upon seeing this, repents in dust and ashes, right? And then he sort of gets a house back and he gets a new wife and kids, right?
But wait a second, I think the solution there that God gives Job is not just shut up and don't ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real solution is the presence of God. God gives Job an overwhelming sense, I am with you. And I think that is where real comfort comes in this life, when we begin to grasp the fact that God is with me. No, he doesn't. You're right. He does not answer any of Job's intellectual questions, but he gives him a profound sense, Job, I am with you. And I think that is a crucial ingredient in a follower of Christ dealing with suffering. No, I ultimately don't know why my little niece died at the age of 7 in a horrible car wreck. But as I'm with my brother, who's a transplant surgeon, he's far more intelligent than I'll ever be. No, I can't answer those questions. Why didn't the babysitter see the stop sign? Why did the babysitter go right through the stop sign and a pickup truck just at 55 miles an hour goes crashing into the car, sending my 7-year-old niece to an early grave? We don't know why, but we do know that God is with us. And to know that God is with us, that he grieves with us, and that he's not just sitting on his hands, but he's going to provide the ultimate solution, I think that helps us tremendously when it comes to comfort and dealing with this incredibly difficult problem of suffering.
But do you think that is the message of Job? I mean, if God had spoken from the whirlwind,
yes,
and said, Job, I hear you. You can't understand what's happening to you, but know that I'm here, know that I love you, then maybe, but he doesn't. He seems almost angry. He seems like, there's this one translation, it's sort of, I found this poetic translation, I wish I could remember who it was, but sort of tries to keep some of the verse of Job. And he has God say, instead of, gird up thy loins, I will question you, and you'll give me an answer, he says, stand up like a man. Because I'm going to ask you some questions. Please instruct me. That's what he says. Yeah. Please instruct me. It's almost sarcastic, right? Because the feeling that you get from God here is like this terrifying rant, right? It doesn't scream love to me. It doesn't scream, hey, I'm with you, I'm holding your hand.
Mm-hmm.
It screams, you should like almost be like terrified into submission. Like Job repents in dust and ashes. He sort of falls to the floor. Like the image in your head is a dramatic one. It's not like Jesus healing the paralytic or something. It's not this nice Renaissance, happy, smiley image. It's this thunderstorm, this whirlwind. And so, like, the message I get is one of God almost feeling that you have no right to answer. And that's why I do make that criticism that it's not that he's not allowed to ask questions, but it's almost like he has no right to do so. It's like when bad things happen to you, it's not just you won't be able to understand this, but you have no right to ask questions that you couldn't hope to understand the answer.
When Christians say suffering only makes sense in their worldview, the problem is that their own texts don't actually solve it. Take Job. God allows a bet with Satan that destroys Job's family, health, and livelihood, all to prove a point. Then, instead of explaining the suffering, God responds with intimidation. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Job 38:2. That isn't comfort, it's divine gaslighting. Even Revelation's promise that one day every tear will be wiped away. Revelation 21:4 doesn't explain why innocent children die now. It only kicks the can down the road. From a historical lens, religions across cultures have created similar, too convenient answers to suffering. Ancient Greeks explained tragedy through fate, Hindus through karma, Christians through sin. Each system reassures its followers, but none provide evidence that suffering has cosmic meaning. In fact, neuroscience shows the opposite. Human brains are wired to create patterns and stories to cope with fear and chaos. That explains why belief systems often arise where suffering is worst. Alex's suspicion is well placed. Christianity sounds persuasive not because it's true, but because it's designed to soothe existential dread. And when a worldview's strongest feature is how comforting it is, that's exactly when we should be most skeptical. So here's the question. Do we value truth even when it's uncomfortable, or do we settle for stories that feel good? Let me know your thoughts. Drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe for more deep dive debates.